One, ready. Good evening, everyone. We are coming to you live from at BARP's headquarters, Merview House, Hastings. And this evening it's my privilege to extend a warm welcome to Dame Billy Miller, who's also our Vice President of BARP, members of the Republican Transition Committee, the Honorable Miss Lolita Applewhite, Senator Reverend Dr. John Rogers, and Ms. Sharita Granham. I also extend a welcome to the Board of Directors of BARP, BARP members, our guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. It is indeed an honor to be here amongst you, the members and guests of BARP, even if it's only virtually. This is a new, we are living in a new normal, and ordinarily this would have been held in a town hall setting, but a physical town hall setting. It is indeed a privilege to represent and speak on behalf of thousands of incredible citizens in this country who 50 years and older, who have made an outstanding contribution and continue to make an incredible contribution to this country's development. Many of you, and because I'm speaking now about the over 50s and over, many of you will recall this country's switch from being a colony under Great Britain to becoming an independent nation in 1966. We all can remember November 1966. Now, the sitting government is planning another step forward on us becoming a republic in another few weeks on November 30th. It's a big deal. This evening, you will have the opportunity to hear of a critical component in this political evolution, the proposed Charter of Barbados. We are grateful to Senator Reverend John Rogers and Ms. Sharita Granham, who are leading this evening's public consultation organized by the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee. So please, this evening, we want to have a very lively online discussion. But before I turn to the lead presenters, on behalf of the Board of Directors of BARP, the management and staff, want to extend our deepest condolences to the relatives and friends of those persons who have lost loved ones as a result of the COVID-19 virus. Today, like every other day, we will remember you, your grieving relatives, the grieving relatives and friends in our prayers. May their memory be a blessing. Tonight, I also want to use this platform to encourage you to observe the protocols. Wear your mask, practice social distancing, avoid socializing in crowds. And I also want to issue another appeal. I want to appeal to the over 70s. Let us start now to institute our own personal lockdown. And I'm not yet over 70 and close enough to associate myself with the over 70s, and I am viewed as a senior. So I'm saying let us start to institute our own personal lockdown. If you leave home 3-4 times a week, look at reducing it to 2, because we have to start to help to slow the spread of COVID-19. And you must realize that it's also attacking us, is robbing families of loved ones. So let us start to make that will be our contribution. I also want to encourage those of you who have not yet been vaccinated, please do it for yourself. Get vaccinated for your families. Even if I know there's a lot of misinformation out there, but people are dying. COVID is real, okay? Please go and get vaccinated. And as you go, encourage someone, take someone. because we need to save lives. We are at the stage now where we can say it's raining COVID. We have to help to stop the flow of COVID in this country. And as we, so I will turn over now to Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers and Ms. Sharita Granham, but I could not leave this platform. Let's call it a platform. I couldn't leave without appealing to all Barbadians, all of you who are watching, to let us recognize that we have a responsibility for ourselves, a serious health responsibility as we seek to fight COVID. Tonight, we are going to be taken on another route. We are going to be viewing the Charter of Barbados. So as seniors in this country, we have we have a serious responsibility. So we have a health issue on one hand, and an issue that we are looking at the charter, which will pave the way for the future for our grandchildren and our grandchildren's children. So tonight, it's all about BARP, it's about our friends, and most importantly, we are very grateful to the members of the Republican Transition Advisory Committee. Good evening, all.
Hi, good evening. Well, thank you so much for that very warm and robust welcome. My name is Sharita Granham, and tonight I am here to represent in my capacity as the subcommittee chair for the Republican Status Transition Advisory Subcommittee on Fundamental Principles, Rights, and Freedoms. And I am joined by my co-chair for these consultations, Senator Reverend Dr. John Rogers. I wish to acknowledge the board of management and members of BARP. Thank you so much for turning out in such amazing numbers for this engagement. This is very heartening to see. It says that you're interested and you're actively participating in the matters of Barbados that relate to you. So I'm very happy to see that. I wish to acknowledge my colleague, our staff members who are online. Lolita Applewade, I think Shirley Bell, I see you. Forgive me, but this turnout is so wonderful that I can't see every participant on one screen. So forgive me, our staff members, if I am not able to name you individually because I can't actually see if everybody is online. But I will certainly be naming you in my vote, in the vote of thanks later on, my version of the vote of thanks, that is. So why are we here? I think the President, Marilyn, would have really set a lovely context with that appeal that she made for the BARP membership to certainly look after themselves as individuals, but also do their part in terms of looking out for the community. And that touches on a much broader theme, the much broader theme of balancing individual responsibility with that collective responsibility that we owe to one another. And that's essentially what the Charter is about. You would have received a document with your invitation to this session entitled The Discussion Draft of the Proposed Charter of Barbados. And speaking on behalf of our staff, what we are here to get out of this session is really your feedback on this discussion draft that was shared with you. It attempts to capture your vision as conveyed to us through the various engagements and consultations that we would have been engaged in over the last few months, and will continue in a much larger forum. We would have started in earnest this weekend with a number of special interest groups throughout the third sector. And we're here tonight, very, very happy to join you. We're here to get your feedback, as I said, on your thoughts on whether or not your vision of this Barbados that we want and your vision of Barbadian Barbados people and institutions and the state imagine at their best is truly captured in this discussion draft. It is your document. It is for you to review, to amend, to pick apart, to just give us your feedback. That is essentially our objective, what we seek to get out of this. And I want to address a few things at the top of the discussion, such as what is a charter, what of this proposed charter, and why now, and a number of other related matters. But before that very exciting portion of this session, when we open up the floor to your burning questions and comments on the discussion draft, I want to pause here and invite remarks from my co-chair, Senator Reverend Dr. John Rogers, whose words, in my experience, certainly, I have learned always seem to bring a sense of purpose to the discussion at hand. So Senator Rogers, the floor is yours, and I will continue after.
Thank you very much, Sharita. Good evening, Madam President and members of the executive of BARP and all members gathered here in this virtual arena. It is indeed a pleasure to be sharing with you in this consultation, and I wish to join with Sharita in thanking you for turning out in such large numbers. It speaks volumes about your interest in Barbados and where we're going. Now, the charter has been formulated, as Sharita pointed out, based on feedback we've received from members of the public, from NGOs, and also from meetings with various government organizations. And it is really set out as we move towards this republic. It sets out the hopes and aspirations of our people as we move towards self-actualization. Sharita has pointed out that she will go into detail in the Wire Charter, but I think I can say, as members of the Republic Status Transition Advisory Committee, when we started reflecting on the Ford Commission report, as well as the draft Constitution of 2004, we realized that there was a gap between then and now. And there are many things that came to the fore. And when we looked at our society and some of the feedback we were receiving, we realized that we required a little more than legislation, that we needed first to have a discussion. We needed first a covenant that we will form as a people before we start setting out our laws for ourselves. And that is where the charter comes in. This particular exercise is very dear to me. As I said in another forum, I'm probably one of the most unlikely persons to be in this setting, for reasons I'll explain later. But it is indeed an honor and a privilege to be participating in this process in shaping what I believe is one of the greatest examples of social democracy in the world, the nation of Barbados. And just to share a bit about my background and why I'm so passionate about what we're doing here. For those of you who may not know, I was born on the tiny island of St. Martin. I was born on the Dutch side, which is about 16 kilometers square miles. The island itself is 37 square miles, just a little bigger than St. Philip. And then I spent my formative years on the island of St. Kitts. I came to Barbados in 1987 to live when my family migrated here. And immediately there were several things about this society that struck me, positive things. And foremost was when I was accepted into the lodge school and went to collect my books. And they gave me all these textbooks and all these exercise books for next to nothing. And told me, when your exercise book is written out, you can bring it back and get a new one. Well, this was like school heaven. I had never seen anything like that. Where I came from, you bought your exercise books, you bought the paper you wrote your exams on. So I realized that this was really a nation of opportunity. And over time, I saw it in other spheres of existence as well. My first day at the lodge was June 1st, 1987. I don't know if that rings a bell with many of you. I believe it would. That was the day our national hero, Errol Barrow, died. That was my first day at school in Barbados, and that had a profound effect on me because I had heard about this man for so long. And here I am, the first time I get to benefit from what it has been said is now his legacy. He died. I never got to see him in person. The first time I saw Errol Barrow was in his coffin at St. John's Parish Church. But that led me to take every advantage of what this country offered in terms of its education, because I realized that it was something beyond anything anyone could imagine. And so I feel myself indebted to this country in a way that I don't believe I'll ever be able to repay it in this lifetime. So whatever opportunity I can get to continue to shape this country and to build it into the best it can possibly be, so that other young people can experience and have the privileges that I had in this country, I will do that. But I should say that over time, having lived here for some time, and even going to school, I recognize that some of my peers were not aware of what they had. They were not aware of the great privilege that had been granted them in terms of their access to education and the books and everything they had. I mean, when I was growing up, you had to wait for a textbook. If an older sibling was in the class before, you wait for that textbook for the year after, or someone in the village would lend you one, and that is how you got your books. And Barbados was way ahead of where that was. And so I felt that I needed to do something to ensure that other children can always have this opportunity. But I'm sure that we're all here. Many of you are children of independence. And you would have seen over time the changes that have taken place in our country. Not all positive. You've seen the waning in the zeal and the spirit of the independence generation. And perhaps now is the time. Now is the opportune time for us to look afresh at ourselves, ask the questions of ourselves that was asked of the independence generation. In what Barbados do we want to see, and how can we get it to that point? In my public life in this country, both in the pulpit and most recently in Parliament, recognizing the challenges that were existing in our society, I've been constantly pushing certain themes. I always remember my first speech in Parliament was one about recalibration. I felt that our society needed to recalibrate, relook at itself. I've also spoke about pressing the reset button. When the Prime Minister spoke about stay the course, I challenged us. Yes, stay the course is important, but I think there are some areas where we must get back on course. And all these things are things that will come up as we seek to shape this covenant between ourselves going forward into the 21st century and beyond. It is not a problem that can be solved with legislation. Neither is it a problem that is unique to Barbados. It doesn't mean that there are not lots of people out there who are working and are doing their utmost to make sure that this nation is the best it can be. But I'm sure that we can all admit that there are some pockets, even if in a minority, there are some very loud pockets that challenge the stability of our country. And now is the time, just perhaps, I don't want to go into a sermon, but I cannot help but quote the prophet Isaiah, who when he reflected upon his nation, Judah, he realized that they had a similar problem, that their zeal had waned, their commitment had waned. The nation was disintegrating in a way that people were not the cohesive unit that they were before. And in the very opening chapter of his book, he said, the ox knows its master, and the ass its master's crib. But my people do not know. My people do not understand. Their princes have become friends of thieves. The prophets prophesy for hire. And he realized that for all the great law that Israel had, there needed to be something more. And so in chapter 1 and verse 18, he said, come, let us reason together. Come, let us talk it through. And that is what this charter is really about. I mean, prior to COVID-19, COVID-19 has affected our society in a very serious way. But prior to COVID-19, we were just one incident away from an airport downgrade or travel advisory. Let us remember that the amount of gunplay that existed in our society. And quoting the words of Cicero, who always challenged the Roman Senate, Cicero said, "In the midst of arms, laws are dumb." We can legislate a lot of things, but there needs to be a soul. There needs to be something deeper. There needs to be a commitment from our people to the development of the nation. And this is what this charter seeks to do. And so I encourage us to get involved and encourage others to get involved so that we can shape the type of Barbados, not only for ourselves, but for our children's children, that can continue to nurture our development. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much for those profound words, Senator Rogers. I did promise that he would bring a sense of purpose, and he definitely delivered. So thank you for that. I also promised that we would jump into some basics and address a few questions. And at the top of that list is, what is a charter? Now, a charter has a lot of different meanings, and it shifts depending on who you ask, who you speak to. It could mean, simply renting or hiring or leasing a vehicle for exclusive or temporary use, but we're pretty sure that that's not what we're discussing here today. It could be a document that companies or organizations use to describe a particular project, its rationale and its goals, and who the participants or the stakeholders are. I think we're getting a little warmer here. It can also mean a document that's issued by an authority that outlines key stakeholders, principles, functions, responsibility, as well as rights and freedoms. And there are different types of charters as well. You can have, as I said, project charters, organizational charters, and then you get into the more political realm. You can have city charters, state charters, royal charters. An example of that royal charter would be our very own Charter of Barbados, signed in 1952, which we often regard as a very seminal moment in the history of Barbados and the establishment of a Barbadian society, where it signaled a truce between Barbados and England. It guaranteed certain rights for Barbados at that time, I should say, how Barbados was constituted, such as no taxation without representation, and is often heralded as a very central influence to the US Declaration of Independence that was signed practically 100 years later. So charters are very significant, they're very powerful. But the type of charter that we're going to be discussing tonight, it takes the form of a citizen's charter. And typically the purpose of a citizen's charter is primarily about protecting citizens and residents from breaches of a specific set of rights and freedoms from the state. But we've sought to take it even further. We put it to you that you can't discuss rights and freedoms and privileges without speaking to duties and responsibilities as well, because rights come with responsibilities to one another and of one another. That is absolutely important when discussing matters of rights and freedoms. So the Citizens Charter is really presented in the discussion draft in a non-justiciable form, and non-justiciable simply means not enforceable in a court of law, but really a symbolic representation of who we are and what our collective values are. What are those things that we pledge to and amongst one another? It's intended to embody the spirit of what it is and what it takes to be the best Barbadian that we can envisage. And as Senator Rogers rightly said, what we need is more than legislation. We have to get back to what it is that we're about, what our specific roles are on this path of national transformation, and not losing sight of who we are as a people and how we relate to one another. And relationships is going to ring very clearly and repeatedly throughout this discussion, because that's really what this is about, relationships. Because it is the strength of our relationships that, has very real and tangible implications for what our quality of life is going to be. And I don't have to, I think I'm preaching to the choir here if I tell you that, there are a lot of Barbadians today whose day-to-day realities is a very fragmented and individualistic and disconnected experience. And particularly so for younger Barbadians, I would say. And it's a hard truth to swallow, but we see the manifestations there. We see it, we hear it, we feel it in rising levels of crime, the violence in our schools, low self-esteem and confidence levels, and certainly in this growing distrust of establishment. We've lost a significant ability to trust one another and our institutions, and that is concerning. But certainly our ability to resolve a lot of these problems that we have we've seen and we speak out against and pointed to in our society, they can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created them. That is, I can tell you that for free. They cannot be solved from the same level of consciousness. So it requires a conversation. It requires a confrontation, and that evolving consciousness also requires that we start to articulate what our respective roles are in society, in the process of nation building, and that we do so without apology. I think that this charter, as it is proposed, is intended to act as a national benchmark of progress and to affirm our most proudly held values. It clearly articulates what the common purpose of Barbadians in all their diversity is, and all walks of life, are having arrived to Barbados by different means, and really truly asserting our equality in this process of defining the Barbados that we want. So I'm going to stop there, because today is really about hearing your feedback and taking note and taking stock of some of the things that may or may not have been considered, where you would like to see heavier emphasis placed on what you have read. Does it truly represent, what you would like to see representing not only you as an individual, but Barbados as a nation state? So I want to pause here, and I will speak to a few housekeeping matters in terms of how we want the process to go tonight. We need a little bit of order in order to make sure that we get as many contributions as possible. So first, if you would like to take the floor, please use the hand raise button at the bottom in the reaction panel, or alternatively, you can post your questions or comments in the chat box, and indicate that you would like to take the floor, and you will be acknowledged. So when your mic is opened, I'm going to ask that you turn your camera on, because we would love to see your lovely faces. You don't only want to look at myself and Senator Rogers for the entire night. So turn your cameras on where possible, and please try to keep each contribution to 2 minutes or less. Yeah. So if we can get going, I see Peter Thompson has his hand raised. Mr. Thompson, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My video is still turned off by the people running the chat. So I'm unable to turn it on at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. That is absolutely fine. So option doesn't work. You know what is it that I grew up hearing, where you don't have horse ride cow?
Absolutely.
We're going with the flow.
Okay, well, first of all, a huge thank you to the Barbados Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee for this draft of the charter. My name is Peter Lawrence Thompson, and I am a 65-year-old Barbadian. In our move towards self-actualization, this draft does not adequately deal with the pivotal historical fact of enslavement. As Reverend Rogers just said, we really must press the reset button. The first example is on page 1, where it says, quote, "We commit to healing this nation and its people from the shame, pain, and injustice of slavery on which it was founded," unquote. It is completely inappropriate to characterize enslavement as a, quote, shame. This word must be deleted from the draft. The second example is on page 2 in the paragraph on human rights, where it says, "Our people have survived the trauma of enslavement," unquote. Again, it is dreadfully inappropriate to characterize enslavement as merely a trauma. A trauma can be the result of any random misfortune. Enslavement was not a random misfortune. It was a profound evil perpetrated by human beings on their fellow human beings. You must clearly state in this clause and speak the truth and characterize enslavement as the historic evil of epic proportion, which indeed it was. I'll stop there. There are many other examples, but at present, the draft does not deal adequately with our historical reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thompson. And I have to say, I mean, I'm not sure how much of my background you're familiar with, but my bachelor's is actually in African and African diaspora studies, and I work primarily around strategizing ways to strengthen our relationships with the African continent, and I'm also a human rights activist with a particular interest and emphasis on the rights of people of African descent. So, I mean, you warm my heart with that contribution. I concur. I will admit, however, that I was still surprised to hear that you want even heavier emphasis. And, you know, I note with particular interest your interpretation of the connotations of the use of the word shame and trauma from a negative standpoint. So certainly your points are very well noted, and something that the committee will take on board, because I don't think that was a particular perspective or approach that was seen or anticipated with the use of those particular words. Senator Rogers, do you have anything to add to that?
I was listening as Mr. Thompson was speaking, and I said he must have been eavesdropping on some of our subcommittee meetings, because I do remember in the previous draft, evil was one of the words we were dealing with because it was there. But yeah. So,
thank you so much.
well, thank you very much.
I want to acknowledge Robin Mahon, sorry, their comments in the chat, which, oh wow, these are some glowing, very glowing words. I think this draft is a great step towards an articulated vision for Barbados, which has been lacking for a while. And it resonates very well indeed with my own vision for Barbados. Thank you very much for that feedback, Robin. Are there any other initial reactions to the discussion draft as it's presented? Just a reminder, you can raise your hand using the reaction box, or you can post your intention in the chat box to take the floor. We would have had Sylvan Payne. The floor is yours. Sylvan Payne. Have we lost you? Okay, maybe
the question is, why trauma has to be seen as static and not dynamic? The trauma continues up to now, so I don't see a problem with using the word trauma, because the trauma continues, the trauma is ongoing, as opposed to something that has occurred and something that is finished. So we must look at it in a dynamic way, as opposed to looking at it from a static perspective.
Okay, that's a very interesting response. Mr. Thompson, do you have any additional comment or response or reaction to that?
Thank you, Sylvan. I agree that the trauma is ongoing, but in my perspective, the trauma that is ongoing is a result of current inequity. It is damage that is being done now. It is not and of course there's a historical continuity between some of the underlying motivations for the damage, but the trauma now today is not directly attributable to enslavement. It is attributable to current inequities in our society, which have a long gestation and a long descent from enslavement.
Okay, Mr. Thompson, I think let me preface this by saying that I am not the person that set the conversation off in this direction. It is usually me, but it's not me this time. So I preface that, but some people might argue that the challenges of the 20th century are more directly linked to the challenges of a 21st century than many people would like to admit. And certainly the patterns of impoverishment and enrichment, in contrast, very much mirror that which existed within the 20th century. So, I mean, there is that path dependency that some people certainly argue and argue well. So I'm not sure I can agree with you there, but that is a personal stance. Well, both your points are well made. I see here another comment in the chat from Robin Mahon. It speaks specifically to the preamble in paragraph 7, and it states that not everyone subscribes to the idea of a creator. Is this necessary here? And further down, it says that all faiths and spiritual orientations are embraced. I think that is an excellent point, and it is a point that carries on from some other engagements that we've had with special interest groups. And the point was made that, you know, if this is to be all embracing, we have to speak to both ends of the spectrum. What about those who do not believe in a higher being, who would be classified as atheists? Or there are some agnostics that, you know, don't necessarily subscribe to the idea of a creator within the sense that, more spiritually grounded persons might. So it is a point that has been made repeatedly, and something that we are taking on board. So thank you very much for that contribution, Robin. I see Mr. Larrier. Ms. Larrier's hand is up. So I will give you the floor at this time.
Thank you very much. I personally have not seen the draft, and I therefore cannot comment on the draft, but I take the point that Mr. Thompson raised early, but I'd like to ask the question. I wrote to the committee to make 2 points to be considered. Could you tell me if the committee received the letter, because I did not have a reply?
You should have. Let me apologize if that is not picked, but you should have received a reply. I will make a note here and speak to our subcommittee that deals with the engagement coming from the emails, and I will have that addressed.
It wasn't, I did not send it by email. I sent it by letter.
Oh, you sent it by letter. Oh, okay. And you sent it to the cabinet office at Bay Street?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
I'm gonna have to see. I haven't seen any physical submissions actually. But
That's
again,
interesting.
I don't have the subcommittee for that. So I will commit to looking into it, and I will commit to reaching out to you myself actually. So thank you for reading that.
Okay.
I'd like to share a bit as to what the submissions contain for the benefit of the forum.
Yes. As a social historian for the last 40 years, and a specialist in, I'm a student of racism for the last 44 years, sorry. And I'm a specialist in racism awareness training and Black consciousness raising. So that's who I am. That's my life. So there's 2 things that I ask. One is that, the first is that the 1661 Barbados Slave Code, if it has not been repealed, it should be repealed. The people of Barbados need to know that Barbados was the first country in the world that passed a law that said that Black people were not full human beings, but chattel. We need to know that. That is the 1661 Barbados Slave Code. The second important thing to be noted in the report is that from 1955, Barbados started a process of people crossing the floor. And that process is still going on up to today. And crossing the floor without any reference to the constituents that elected the person to represent their interests. And that is because the Constitution of Barbados does not permit for a political party to be represented in the House of Assembly. As a result of that, no political party name or acronym is on the ballot paper when people go to vote. That have some very disadvantageous features, because if I cannot read and write, how would I know who to vote for if I want to keep my vote as a secret? For instance, if BLP or DLP or NDP was on the ballot paper, I will be able to do that. Secondly, people have been fooled into believing they are voting for a political party when in fact they're voting for an individual, as we have seen in so many cases with people crossing the floor and therefore having no recourse. So these are the two things that I would like to see in the Constitution or in the document. These are two fundamentals.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Mr. Larrier. And certainly it is the expectation that these discussions form the basis, the foundation for those much larger consultations on constitutional reform and amendments, which are slated to begin in earnest from January next year. Mr. Downs, your hand was up for a while. Would you still care to take the floor?
Yes. Good night to all, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
I have two issues to raise. The first one is in relation to the document. I note that there are 4 articles which are pretty fair, Mike, and then which point essentially to what we want to look forward to going in the future in terms of what we would like Barbados to be. They are fine. I'm talking about the bold print in the document itself. The challenge I have is that, and this is where I want to find out, to what extent will the discussion that follows the articles form part of the charter? Because it seems to me that we can, whilst we might agree broadly, and I agree with Robert to some extent, if we just take the 4 broad articles that are given, I think they're fine and can stand on their own and go forward. The challenge we have in terms of the write-up, I don't sure is a justification for the individual articles. How would those fit into a document at the end of the day? So the question I want to raise then is that whilst the articles themselves, as stated in the document, seem to be fine in terms of a charter for Barbados going forward, they can always be extended, of course. The issue is to what extent will be the write-up that follows each article be incorporated into the final document called the Charter of Barbados. That's my concern, because I can see where there can be very contentious points. I saw some myself, even historical inaccuracies were there, but we can always pin those down. So I think my approach would be to minimize the focus more on the articles themselves and what they mean, and whether people can agree to these particular articles, than getting bogged down really into a lot of the details that I see that has come up from it, which might be fine for discussion, but I'm not sure it's going to advance much further than where we are. And the second issue I have in relation to the role of the charter in the whole scheme of things. My understanding of charters sometimes they help to inform more legalistic documents. You said that certainly this is not a legalist, can't be taken to court and be argued. So it's a question of how we feel and what we want to do going forward. But it certainly would inform what we want in the legal document, which is the Constitution, and other things that follow from that. And the question that arises in my mind is that in terms of the 4 articles, do we have a smooth path between the 4 articles that have been specified in this particular document and a proposed constitution that I hear, because I hear the Prime Minister speaking about a 2-year consultation and thing, but the question is that you have to have those 4 articles or others that you might want to add to the exercise upfront all the time when you discuss the nitty-gritty legal issues that will go into the Constitution. So I just want to note the extent to which the Charter itself, taking those 4 articles as the basis for it, and probably other articles you might want to identify, would feed in smoothly into the development of the Constitution, the new Constitution of Barbados, and how that particular process will work out. Because I'm quite sure, listening to the discussion so far, we can get deviated into tributaries and lose away the trunk of the river. So I just want to raise those 2 points.
Thank you so much.
Thank
And those
you.
points were well made. I want to give way to my co-chair, Senator Rogers, if he would care to respond.
Well, I'm glad that Dr. Downs raised those questions, because it is precisely why we're here, because this document is just a skeletal document, and we're hoping that you will help us to add some more flesh to it where you see any gaps. But also it is meant to be the foundation upon which we begin to discuss the constitutional changes that we would like to see. I believe it was Sir Roy Marshall who said, look, we have a good constitution already. It has helped us for the last 55 years or so, about 50 years at the time when he wrote. But the reality is that we recognize that there are some things that the 21st century is challenging us to focus on. And I think that this just sets the platform for us to start looking at the broader constitutional changes. In terms of the seamlessness of the smoothness with which the document can be used to raise those issues, I believe that in our consultations, the feedback we receive will help us to shape that.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Thank you, Senator Rogers. I think you hit it on the head, and I was so happy that Mr. Downs raised that question, especially the latter part of the contribution, and it ties very neatly into Winfred Austin's question that's placed in the chat that says, in the opening remarks stated that the draft charter is not justiciable. What will make the contents of this draft legal? And the simple answer to that is whether or not you think it needs to be, and how hard you lobby for it. Because I would have started off explaining the different types of charters, explain not justiciable versus non-justiciable, and certainly some of the more recognizable charters or bills of rights that we can point to a reference. Those are largely entrenched charters, which means that they form part and parcel of the Constitution and are therefore justiciable. What we have presented, as I said, is in a non-justiciable form, but certainly the whole point of these types of consultations is to get your feedback. Is it that you think a charter makes sense for us at this point in time in our national development? Do we need it? If it is that we have presented a discussion draft of a charter in a non-justiciable form, and you think that it is valuable enough and critical enough for us to give it those legislative teeth, to have it considered to be entrenched and justiciable, certainly lobby for that. Make the recommendation. That is what we are here for, to hear from you how you feel about it. So if it is that you think it needs to be, absolutely, we will note it, and it will be it will form a critical part of the report that we are charged with making to the Cabinet of Barbados, from whom our mandate is derived. So thank you both very much for those questions. I need to jump back to the former part of Mr. Downs's question, which spoke to what extent the body underneath the articles is going to form part of the charter. Certainly, it was the expectation that the discussion draft in its entirety would be considered as the discussion draft of the proposed charter. So it's very interesting to hear you say, and I don't want to misrepresent what you said. My interpretation was that you think it could devolve the conversation a bit and cause us to spend too much time squabbling and grappling over the specificity and the details. Do you want to expand on that a little bit more, Mr. Downs?
Yeah, no, my point is straightforward. It is the 4 articles that you have identified. Number 1, this speaks about all Barbadians are born free and are equal in human dignity, and so on, so on, so on. I think most of us, not all of us, can agree to the 4 articles as stated. I don't think they are contentious in my view, and I doubt very much. What will become contentious is when you get into the details, when write-up around each particular one. So I think my view is that certainly we should focus, if you're talking about a charter going forward in terms of developing a constitution that is going to be forward-looking, then we should focus our attention on the 4 articles that have been specified in detail. That's my simple point. If there are additional ones to be added, I mean, I can think of any more, the 4 talks about the whole question of equality, and one, and secondly, the whole question of duty of care. The third one speaks about the whole question about duty of participation and people's involvement in society and economy and so on. And the final one talks about the environment. So my thing is that the 4 of those should be pulled out up front, even in terms of presentation, as being the core elements of the charter. The discussion that comes after that can be fine. I mean, they might be pointing to issues that might be needed to be considered by a constitutional committee. For example, I asked a question about the social partnership and the social justice committee. Will these be now embodied in the constitution to ensure that we have Article 2 in place, right? Yeah. I mean, these are sort of technical questions that will come out later on. But I think at the beginning, the charter will probably reflect aspirations of us as Barbadians going forward, and therefore the focus should certainly be on those 4 plus 1 or 2 more that we might want to think of. I say I will have to think a little bit harder about it because I only read this half an hour before coming to this meeting, so it was a rush job on my part, given I was pretty busy with other matters. But I think certainly the 4 that I saw are fine to start the charter off. And if you can get them in, get 1 or 2 others in that sort of format, I think we have something that we can work with going forward as an agreeable charter. And a lot of the other details that come up then can be good reading as background, more so than being embodied in this. Because if you say to me that this is the charter, I can see you have all sorts of quarrels and contentions about technical details, historical details, and and so on and so on. But I think the 4 highlighted ones certainly constitute the core base, the 4 that will go into the final charter. And we might want to think about what additional elements we want to incorporate in the charter, very much along those lines that we want to think. I think if the discussion goes that route, will be much better than if you try to get into some of the details that I'm seeing here in the document. So that's essentially the point I was making.
Thank you, and I think it's a point well made. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. Are there any other initial remarks, reactions to the discussion draft? Anything that you would like to place on the table? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Reverend Rogers.
Mr. Larrier raised the point about crossing the floor post-1955. And I wish to point him towards the 2004 draft of the Constitution on the website, because I think it has something in there which will help to deal with that challenge, in that there was a proposal in that draft to incorporate into the Senate persons from political parties who may not have won a seat, but would have gained at least 10% of the popular vote. And I suspect just by recognizing a political party, you've introduced something new into the Constitution, which may deal with other matters where parties are concerned. But I think that's a technical matter, but I think that may help to deal with the issue that he's raising.
Okay, thank you so much, Reverend Rogers. Joseph Griffith, you have the floor.
Hi, ma'am. Good night. You can hear me, right?
Yes, hearing you loud and clear.
Yeah, I regret that I did not get to see the charter until now. But I think that from my impression, the discussion is set against the background that have existed for a long time, that we need to be fully independent. I want to focus briefly on the idea of the section of equitable development. And unless that we are serious about development of the individual, unless, and we do not intend to allow ourselves, in other words, it is easy to write things in paper that sound good. But I think that unless that we will commit ourselves to the total development, and I like words that come up about taking the best opportunity. In other words, does it put the onus on somebody to make sure that we have ready the best opportunities? And I like the words of innovation and critical thinking. And I think that if Barbados is really supposed to benefit from the effort of being a Republican state, and we do not empower our people to do critical thinking, to be able to be creative, start developing ourselves and selling ourselves and being proud of ourselves, I think that this would be a sad effort, wasteful effort that would cost much money, waste our time, and then cool down. So I wish that in doing this charter, that in the end, I think it was being suggested that it must have embodied in it some kind of binding commitment. I pause.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Mr. Joseph.
You're precisely, sorry.
Go ahead, Reverend Roger.
I was going to tell Mr. Joseph, he's precisely the reason we're here, because this is what we are hoping to come out of this document, that there is meaningful change. I know that as a nation, we've already started focusing on technical vocational education and training, which deals with a lot of critical thinking and skill-based expertise. But one of the things we have to do, and as I said, there's some things we can legislate, but there are some things that require heart. And one of the things we have to do coming out of this whole process is start valuing each other's gifts, whatever they are. Because I think we can all admit that we still see persons in certain professions and certain spheres of endeavor as inferior to others, simply because they're not academic and so on. And this is something that a new Barbados will have to take into account and start valuing every person for what he or she brings to the table. So I'm glad that you raised that point, Mr. Joseph.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that we can be proud of, a very enduring principle that we have held onto in Barbados, is that our definition of development centers the people. And that is a distinction that we can proudly make when we make whatever contrast. And I'm not calling them names because, as I say, no name, no blame, no lockup. But certainly we can be proud. We can be proud to hold that up as one of our most proudly valued principles. I see a very familiar name, Dr. Charleston Brathwaite. You have the floor, sir.
Evening.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hearing you loud and clear, sir. How are you doing? Nice.
Thank you very kindly. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to say a few words, and I would like to congratulate the committee and yourselves for giving us this opportunity to participate in this important process and this important initiative for our country. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes, hear clearly.
I have not seen the discussion draft, and therefore I cannot comment on the draft since I haven't seen it. And I'm hoping that very shortly I'll be able to get a copy so that I'll be in a position to comment on the draft. But when you started this discussion this evening in your introduction, you spoke about asking what kind of Barbados would we like to see? And I would just like to make a brief comment with respect to that particular question. What kind of Barbados would we like to see? And I'm sure that each and every one of us would have probably a different opinion or varying opinions on a variety of topics with respect to answering that question. But I would like to take this opportunity to mention one thing that I would like to see. There are a lot of things I would like to see, but I would like to mention one this evening. The Barbados that I would like to see is a Barbados where there is no poverty. This implies a Barbados that is more equitable in terms of income distribution, where there's a culture of opportunity and equity, and a culture where the services of security, health, education, and food become fundamental rights. And I'm sure that some may say, but these are policy issues and should not be in a charter. And I would beg to differ. I would beg to differ because I'm sure that we all would remember that there's a certain country, the name of which I will not call, where the Constitution speaks to the pursuit of happiness. Why can't we have a charter that speaks to the elimination of poverty? And in so doing, develop a people-centered development model that seeks to eliminate poverty from Barbados. Just as slavery was eliminated in the 19th century, in this world of global prosperity, why shouldn't we have a policy and a strategy and a charter that says, let us put an end to poverty in Barbados in the 21st century by following a people-centered development that focuses on people, all people, both the rich and the poor. I believe that such incorporation of an element such as the elimination of poverty would provide us with a platform to develop a more equitable society, and a society where everyone has an opportunity to prosper and to grow. Those are my initial comments. Thanks very kindly for the opportunity to come in at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bradford. Any responses to that very powerful contribution? Eliminate poverty. Usually we hear it couched in terms of reducing inequalities, but as we're aiming for the best version of us and we want to eliminate poverty altogether. I don't think that's too ambitious a goal. What are your thoughts, Rev. Rogers?
Well, I would like to think that that is wrapped up in several other things that are there in the charter as well. And one of them has to do with food security in Barbados. And not only food security, but retraining the taste buds of our people to eat what we produce. I think I heard in another forum today that on one occasion, the late Prime Minister of Trinidad remarked that the people of Trinidad, their taste buds are more attuned to a kernel from the South of America, where he was talking about how the people were drawn towards KFC. And I believe that we here, in order to start creating the elimination of poverty, we have to start looking at food security on the island and sustainability of such as we go forward.
Thank you.
But there are other aspects of it as well in terms of wealth distribution and contracts, how contracts are distributed in the country, and is there a sense of equity where all persons can participate. I think we're seeing more and more in recent times that we're having these large groups of companies, a group of companies where the subcontracts end up in the hands of the same company that got the contract. And so the distribution is not there.
Absolutely, very much wrapped up in that umbrella concept of, you know, economic enfranchisement. And
Yes.
certainly one of those areas that, based on the feedback we've been receiving, is a section that a lot of people would like to see a greater emphasis on, as reflected in the proposed charter. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for those contributions. In the chat, we have a comment from Robin Mahon. It states, Article 3 under democracy, final paragraph. The mention of civil society in this paragraph seems almost like an afterthought. I thought that the role of civil society in governance needs to be more prominent, including a commitment to strengthen civil society partners to play that role. It could even go as far as saying that to the extent possible, responsibility will be delegated to civil society as appropriate. Okay, Mr. Mahon, would you like to, I'm sorry, I assume Mr., but Robin Mahon, would you like to elaborate any further on that point?
Yeah, I could say a little bit more, but I hope that the point was sort of self-explanatory. And I think we have a situation in Barbados where we have a lot of civil society effort, fledgling civil society organizations, but I don't think that they are being included in governance to the extent that I would want to see. And I think the social partnership is one area that could expand its scope, and it does. The charter does speak to the expansion of the scope of the social partnership, but I think including civil society, and because of who I am, particularly into the area of environmental issues. So that would be my elaboration there. But I think it seemed like a bit of an afterthought stuck down there at the end.
Okay, thank you. Well, certainly let me assure you it was not. You're preaching to the converted here as it pertains to the role and the contribution of the third sector to our overall national development. I personally don't think it is given enough regard. So you do make a very good point. My knowledge of the expansion to the Social Partnership Committee is limited. However, I can say that I do know of a white paper that would have been produced with regards to expanding the social partnership to include broader representation from the third sector. You're nodding, yeah, you recall that as well. Yes, so certainly efforts are in train, but absolutely, I have made a note that we need a greater emphasis and we need to ensure that civil society does not feel sidelined in this process, and that we certainly enhance the representation and the acknowledgement of the contributions throughout the discussion draft as it's presented. So thank you very much for that contribution. Thank you so much, Alfio Wiggins, who has commented, excellent discussion forum. The draft document is towards the end of the email with the PDF icon. Thank you so much. Yes, the document was attached in the invitation. It is also available on BARP's website, and hard copies, for those of you who would prefer hard copies, are also available at the BARP office. Thank you very much. I want to go back to the floor. Are there any other contributions? Just a reminder, you can simply raise your hand in the reactions panel. Yes, thank you, Mr. Downs. Dr. Downs, I'm so sorry.
No, Andrew's fine. Andrew's fine. I just want to go back to Chelsea's point, and also to Robin's, and it raised. And I've looked at the 4 articles again, because those are really I want to focus on. Right? I mean, my focus is really on each of those, and to get a sense of what aspect of the Barbadian future or aspiration for the future that we really want to look at. And if you take the Article 1, we're talking about the whole question of dignity and rights being the focal area, right? I mean, the rest is just expansion of what it is. So I think Article 1 focuses on the whole question of human dignity and rights. Article 2 focuses on human relationships, how we view each other, how we relate to each other, which one can call human or social relationships. 3 speaks more about elements of participation and citizenry there. And 4 speaks about sustainable development. I know Robin might not agree with me, but I'm a hardcore economist. And therefore, I don't see, although sustainable development, one can argue for, put the economic aspects in there, but it combines all the elements. There is, and that's what I think Charleston's point raises in my mind, that there is no specific economic aspiration as an article. I mean, that's the one. Because I said to you earlier that we have 4 articles here, and you can start with those and see what additional ones we can flesh out. And it seemed to me that a lot of the discussion, the background discussion that is there, points to probably the need for us to have 2 more. One is an explicit economic aspiration, which might very well be the eradication of poverty, although I'm not sure, although it is mentioned here as reduction in poverty. The very last page, the last penultimate paragraph speaks, not penultimate, sorry, somewhere towards the end speaks about the reduction of poverty and provision of, and to provide for the most vulnerable, so deprivation. So it is there, elements of it there. But I think what would enhance the document would be an explicit economic aspiration. And I'm quite sure the chairman of the overall group would be the best position to do. I think I saw the chairman somewhere here in the group, so she might be listening. She can probably formulate a nice economic aspiration that is there. That is probably implicit within the sustainable development one. And the other one that I think is missing explicitly is one on governance. There is not an explicit article on governance as such. How do we want to see ourselves being governed? Yes, I think that would help a lot in terms, because as I said, these articles will help form the basis on which we will be developing constitutional elements and so on. And I think in addition to the 4 that I've outlined, when we speak about human rights and citizenry, human relations or social relations, questions of participation and so on, there might be one that talks about the explicit elements of governance, which would take in consideration the questions of I think the point raised by Robin about the social society and so on, but we may want to bring that explicitly into the picture. So I think the other 2 articles I think that can be pulled out explicitly will be one which talks about the economic future of Barbados and the elements of the discussion there, and it is a matter of pulling out as a specific Article 5, and Article 6 can probably speak about the whole question of governance. So listening discussion so far, I think those are 2 concrete things I think that you can formulate. We just need to find the formulation of the words that will speak to that will help enhance the document in my view. And I think it would answer some of what Robin and Justin would have mentioned.
Okay, I'm acknowledging Robin's hand, but Dr. Dunn, sorry, Andrew.
Right.
Can I point you to Article 3? Can you take a look at Article 3 and tell me if that doesn't address the matters of governance as you expressed?
I thought so originally, but it speaks about the it speaks about more the need. I put it down as participation and being elements of citizenry more so than governance, which is a broad and the next level of is a more organizational element there. So I guess it can follow on. It's possible, but I mean, I see Cynthia Barr somewhere here in the group, and I don't like speaking out of terms. I'm not a political scientist, so I only speak about what I'm thinking. But I saw Cynthia somewhere here. She's still here. But I thought that while this speaks about participation of persons, I don't think my understanding of governance is not as strong on governance as I think it should be. Let me put that way, given my understanding of it. But I leave it to the political scientists and those who are more in tune with that than I am. So that's the point I'm making. If you think that it covers it, fine. But I don't want to rush. The discussion might have elements of it, but the article itself doesn't totally reflect it. That's what I was making.
Okay, point is taken. Reverend Rogers?
No, I just wish to thank Mr. Downs. We're certainly appreciative of these views that he is offering, and I'll encourage him if he can just write us a little snippet to broaden this thought that can help us to, if we need to further articulate these aspects of the charter, we can do so through his help. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Want to acknowledge Robin, yeah, before, and then you'll be followed by Rashid Taylor.
Thank you. I'm trying to turn on my video, but it's not letting me, so I'll just go ahead anyway. I was going to intervene on a different, oh, the host has stopped it. There we go. For some reason. I was going to intervene on a different point. My points are largely quite detailed in reference to particular articles, but I would just like to say that I would not be averse to, and I would support the idea of an article on economics as suggested by Andrew. As to what exactly it would say, we may have different opinions on that. But if it were to reflect ideas pertaining to moving away from conventional economic growth, particularly as reflected by indicators such as gross domestic product and so forth, and more towards indicators of human well-being, as has been the case in other countries, then I would think that such an article could be a significant contribution to the thinking about where Barbados wants to go in the future. I mean, my other point was, the one I put my hand up for was specifically in relation to Article 4, Environment, Sustainable Development and Resilience, and in the paragraph 4, I just wanted to make the point that maybe we should recognize that protecting and sustaining are no longer sufficient in terms of environment. Our ecosystems, agricultural and natural, have been degraded to an extent that we need to be talking more about regenerating than just keeping them the way they are now. And especially if we're going to fulfill our moral obligation to future generations. And this is a perspective that is becoming widely accepted elsewhere as well, as we have coming to realize the impact we've had on our planet's ecosystems to provide ecosystem services. So the regeneration idea could be one that could find its way in here. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. And again, you know, we are well aware of the shortcomings of GDP as a singular measure of an economy. We know that it tells a very incomplete picture because it's designed for no other purpose than to measure the output of a market economy, and development has to go much further and much broader than simply that. And in order to measure the health of an economy, you need to understand levels of vulnerability and levels of well-being. So absolutely, 100% agreed, but I am not an economist. I am not an economist.
Far from that.
Far from. I am looking, I lost the other hand that was raised. I sincerely hope you have not.
Taylor.
Rashid, are you
Taylor?
Rashid?
Yes, Rashid.
Oh, thank you.
Good evening.
You are. Good evening.
Good evening.
You've muted yourself again.
Okay, there we go. Good evening, and thanks very much for the invitation that was extended through all our group chat today. I unfortunately I wasn't able to get to here at the beginning of the meeting, but I'm here now, and I'm really want to say that I really enjoying and listening to the brilliant voices that are around the table. In my very brief and rapid read of the document, I saw what I saw was that a myth around justice and justice. I searched for the word justice. Social justice comes up, a bit of a reparatory justice, and past fights for justice and injustice against slavery. But a justice system is not considered. I also want to say that freedom was only mentioned twice. But around justice, and what does that look like in a future Barbados? You know, do we continue with a punitive justice system? We spoke earlier of creating poverty and marginalization. But currently, we have a justice system that impacts on the poor and make people even poor, and creates generations of poverty. And I say in my circles here in Canada that, you know, in Barbados we have a system and a cultural belief or a reality that, you know, once someone has gone to prison, they have gone to hell, right? Is there an opportunity to imagine a Barbados where justice is done differently? Or there are other avenues to achieve justice? Restorative justice practices, even the system of leaving the justice system and returning to society. What does that mean? What does it mean for support of people while incarcerated? What does it mean for their families and other people impacted by the person's crime, themselves and their families, but also victims of crime? Like, what does that mean? And can we imagine a Barbados where justice is sought both by the perpetrator and the victim, and that we can create a system that might consider another avenue to achieve justice, you know, for our future? And that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it is a very valued contribution indeed. Senator Rogers, I want to throw to you for a second to respond a bit to that, because I saw you nodding just as much as I was. But I have to beg the indulgence of the organizers, as we are 3 minutes to 9, and I do not want to stop this momentum that we have going. Would it be possible for us to have a few more minutes?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Senator Rogers?
I share the views of Mr. Taylor in terms of what type of justice system will we have going forward, and how will the vulnerable at the bottom of our society, the lower levels of our society, will be treated by the justice system, and how do we rehabilitate persons without the punitive measures that we have. One of the things that struck me, and I believe I would have spoken to when we dealt with the medicinal cannabis bill. There are a lot of young boys in Dodds for a 5-bag or spliff. But here you are now going to have a large group of people who are at a level where these young boys cannot participate in the whole enterprise because it's exclusive for them. And they're walking around with a charge sheet that is probably longer than anything, and the scars of incarceration. And now the society has moved on and said, but this thing is really good. And so these are issues that we have to deal with going forward, you know, and how our young boys are treated, and not to lower the level of the conversation, but I did remember seeing a comment the other day when the police had this great raid of marijuana trees and they were burning them, but somebody said, but the government told us to plant more trees. Just that thing. But these are some of the issues we have to deal with going forward. And thank you very much, Mr. Taylor, for bringing that up.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, I'm acknowledging you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Granham. I want to support what Rashid Taylor said very strongly. And again, I'm going to go into the weeds a little bit, I am afraid, because on page 5, you say, you know, respect for the rule of law, and rather than respect for justice. And you, in our historical context, we cannot ever forget that the 1661 law was law. And so it is not sufficient for us simply to respect the rule of law. We must get beyond and beneath that and inculcate respect for justice.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much. And it's definitely well noted. Mr. Barker, the floor is yours.
Good night. I wasn't here from the beginning, so I can't speak to exactly what was brought to the table, but I'm looking at the article and I notice in the section under respect, we shall seek to strengthen ties between Barbadians of all ages in order to enshrine the dignity of and respect for one another. We uphold the family as a key institution through which our present and future generations are and shall be nurtured. And I would like to find out what the family right now is a very broad word. And I want us to be able to zero in on exactly what we mean when we talk about the family. Is it the traditional family that we're accustomed to? Or are we about to endorse whatever is happening in the world? That's my first comment. And the next one, I noticed that at the beginning of the document, one of the protected classes is under Article 1. It speaks of all Barbadians are born free and are equal in human dignity and rights, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, faith, class, cultural and educational background, ability, sex, gender, or sexual orientation. And I would like a definition, if possible, of what is meant by sexual orientation.
Okay, we now get to the spicy part of the engagement. I'm surprised this didn't come up earlier in the discussion. And I'm going to tackle a response to you on the matter of family, and I'm going to throw to my co-chair, Sandra Rogers, as it pertains to the definition of sexual orientation, and certainly the distinctions to be drawn between sex, gender, and sexual orientation as categories of people. When you question family, do you not accept the diversity in which family is experienced, particularly within a Barbadian context? Because when you say traditional, I assume you mean nuclear, but for a typical Barbadian family, even that is not the typical experience. When you say traditional family, what do you mean?
Well, when I grew up, I grew up in a house with a father and a mother, brothers and siblings, and we recognized that there was a system of authority, a rule, and because of that system in which I grew up, I could not decide, at 14 and 15 what time I come home, exactly where I went. If there was such a thing as the block in my time, I was under the control of my parents. And I noticed that in recent times, the family has moved away from what I would consider that as the traditional family. And what we have now is a lot of single parents, mothers raising children, and the mothers are unable to exert that sort of authority on their own. And hence, this is where we have the problems in the society, because the boys especially, and we can, all of us know that a 14-year-old boy who decides that he is going to challenge his mother, the mother's going to lose, except she's had some sort of training in karate or what have you. But in the traditional family now, your mother might be 68 or 78, and she speaks to you. You recognize her as mother, even though you may be 50 or 60. So it was that sort of influence that we had, where our children were unable to use a Bayesian term, get away. They were under the influence of the parents. And that, I think, is what made Barbados strong. I think we've lost that. And therefore, when we look at what is coming in from the outside and what is happening and what is being forced on Barbados, then we wonder, then that's why I ask the question, what do we mean by family?
Okay, but what I'm hearing from you is that you're seeing family as a function, which is how we have crafted it here, family as a function, as opposed to the form. And frankly, that the function that I am hearing you describe, that discipline, that value, that nurturing, that seeing the family as an institution that is a crucible of care, can obtain in families of all diversities and all forms. Is that not so?
Not to my knowledge. I believe, and I don't know if the goodly senator will support me in this, but I believe that the family that we have been given, and do I dare mention the Bible? Do I dare mention the biblical definition where our Lord Jesus speaks of a man and a man leaving his mother and cleaving unto his wife, and the two becoming one flesh? And then those two people who become one flesh, invariably they come together, they learn each other, they produce children. And one of the things about that unity, that unit is that, even though a father and mother tended to have differences, when it came to the children, you dare not try to play them against each other. So as I'm saying, maybe I grew up in a different Barbados, but my thinking is that sometimes when somebody said when you've lost something, you go back to where you last had it. And I'm saying that the indiscipline that we have in our society is a result of the breakdown of the family, and children are left to their own devices much too early.
Okay, Sandra Rogers.
Thank you very much, Sharita, and thank you very much, Mr. Barker. I think just to pick up on the snippet of the last bit of your comments, when we speak of Barbados or indeed the Caribbean, we have to recognize that we are more or less a matriarchal society. Matriarchs are the ones that were the center and the core of our family structure. And many of the families that many Barbadians grew up in were not the traditional nuclear family that you seem to consider as the source of strength. And we must say that we must thank those women who led those families, and the men as well. And you also mentioned the Bible, but recognize that the Bible also has lots of different examples of families, and key of which was David and his many wives and concubines, which basically led to the destruction of his kingdom because his son Ammon raped his daughter. I forgot the name of the daughter, but I'll get that. And that led to the war between David and Absalom, who was the daughter's brother from the same mother. And so there was that family dynamic there too. So the traditional quote unquote family is not always there in biblical literature. I think what you also spoke about were the additions of things of sex, gender, and sexual orientation. Now, these are here because of submissions that were made by persons in our society, and also reflections from even back in 1998, the Ford Report. There was a call to even change the language of the Constitution to be more gender neutral, and to include gender as one of the areas which discrimination should be, protection against discrimination should be put. When we speak of sex in the 21st century, a lot has changed and the world has changed much. You said we're importing from overseas, but I wish to advise you that is very much here. Because when we speak of sex, we are speaking of the sex that is ascribed to you at birth, whether male or female. But what we've found over time, and it's there in the Bible as well, that there are people who do not fit into these two categories of sex. They're now what we refer to, and the United Nations recognized this from way back in 2015 and encouraged nations to stop discrimination against this middle group of people that we now refer to as intersex. These are people who, when they're born, it is difficult to put them in any category of male or female because of what we now call, I don't know if you were watching the Olympics and saw people like Mbama and Masalinga and Caster Semenya and all those people, what we call DSD athletes, difference of sex disorders. These are people who are born with both male and female features. So you can have a young girl being born with all the characteristics that make her look like a girl. There appears to be a vagina, etc. But inside there is no womb and she carries testes in her abdomen or ovicular testes, right? So you have this group of people that we must now consider that they exist in the world. And they were there in the Bible too. I can give you some passages to look at. I think we've been looking at the wrong people. The person of the eunuch in the Bible is really like that third intersex gender, or third intersex, that intersex person. Because of intersex, because there's such a category of intersex and the world is now gradually recognizing, yes, these are people who've been marginalized. What used to happen before is that the doctors and the parents would make a decision and say, all right, it looks more like a boy than a girl, let's make it into a boy and do the surgical procedure there. But what you found is that these people grew up with what is known as gender dysphoria, that the sex to which they were assigned is not the gender role they felt or experienced themselves to be. And so what they've done now, what the United Nations have argued is, do not mutilate these children, let them grow up so that they can discern who they really are. And this is a real group of people, and some of them may very well exist amongst us here. And we have to create that space for this marginalized group. And if you accept that there is a category of intersex, you also have to accept that sometimes the sex that society ascribes to a person is not necessarily the gender that they would adopt, because it's not who they feel they are within, because there's this balance taking place within them. And then
with all due respect, Reverend, sorry to cross you. You are building a thesis on a very small minority when you talk about those.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because the Constitution and our Charter is not here simply to support the majority group, but to make sure that the minority can live in freedom and dignity within our state as well. It is very important that every Barbadian has the space to live his or her life in the freedom with which God has created him or her.
But the term that I really wanted a definition for is sexual orientation.
Well, I can get to that now, because if you accept that there's such a thing as intersex, and you accept then that this person who may look like a boy may feel himself to be a girl because of his genetic makeup, or the person who looks like a girl may feel herself to be a boy because of her genetic makeup. In the eyes of the populace, this girl may feel more attracted to another girl because in her gender, she feels that she is a boy. And so you're going to have this sexual orientation. Sexual orientation simply means the sex to which you're attracted. And so you may have someone whom society may identify as male, but that person's gender that they adopt may be female and may find themselves attracted to a male. And so you get sexual orientation within that construct. And, you know, you're always going to have in these things anomalies where there are people who may not fit into this category who may adopt it. But the reality is that you have to create the space for the minority to live their lives in freedom.
Thank you.
Of course, this
sorry.
requires a broader discussion, but this is just a snippet of what.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barker, I'm sure that you were chomping at the bit to respond, but I need to say this, and I want to say this unapologetically, that a significant part of this process is going to require us to be honest and open about those prejudices which we hold as a society that do not serve us going forward into any future Barbados that we can envisage. And with a clear understanding that matters of rights, and fundamental rights and freedoms are not subject to something as simple as an opinion. And the whole purpose of imagining us at our best and putting certain protections like these in place from discrimination, etc., is to protect us when we start to behave at our worst, you know. And I think Reverend Rogers really captured the essence of the definitions, but I certainly wouldn't want you to walk away thinking that we are pandering or making apologies for ensuring that Barbadians of all walks of life, of all identities and all intersecting identities are not represented in this charter. This charter is not for some Barbadians, it's for all. So that being said, are there any other comments? It is now 9:17 and we're beginning to wind down. Thank you, Mr. Peter Thompson and Charlotte Thomas for supporting Reverend Rogers' very robust response to the question that was posed. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been posed. I'm very happy it was, because that's the whole point of these. That's the whole point of these conversations. They're conversations that have to be had. Some are going to be, you know, very easy and easygoing and and palatable and easy to digest, but some are going to be about confronting some very hard and uncomfortable truths. And sometimes the hard and uncomfortable truths might not necessarily be what you go into the conversation with. So I'm sorry, Mr. Barker, but from a personal standpoint, I personally cannot agree with that position. Again, I'm going to offer the floor to anyone who has a contribution to whether it is for or against or related to another topic. Sylvan Payne, you have the floor.
Good night again. As we come down to the close, I just want to state that a charter that is concerned with constitutional and legalistic issues but does not seek to improve the quality of the lives of the people is useless.
Okay.
So the bottom line is, at the end of the day, all of the changes we might embark on must develop itself in improving the lives of the people of the nation, the people of Barbados. And hence, the issue of developing our young people, giving them opportunities, must be foremost in our mind. And we must not only think in terms of entertaining our young people by way of providing them with these entertainment activities, giving them lights on the pasture. If a little football is going to do it, it's going to help them. We must not think as well that we can simply give them temporary jobs by cleaning the streets. We must, at the end of the day, equip them with skills. And even though some of the guys may not be academically inclined, I am of the view that we can still continue to educate them, okay? Not necessarily taking them to the college or university, all right? But we must do everything possible to improve their education so that they can help themselves. And the issue of poverty alleviation, which was raised by our brother Rafi, is something that we must pursue with all of our passion, okay? Because I believe that this can become a reality as well. But what I'm really saying here is that we must not become preoccupied with constitutional issues and legalistic issues, but every attempt must be made to improve the total life of the people of Barbados. Thank you so much.
If I may respond to Sylvan, Mr. Payne, I'm glad you raised those issues because I think someone earlier mentioned another constitution that says the pursuit of happiness. And in fact, a major index upon which the development of nations is being measured now is the happiness of its people. And that happiness comes not, as you said, simply from providing a playing field or something, but there needs to be also a development, a return to the community spirit that shaped many of us and the community groups like the 4-H and so on that help to give people those basic survival skills, things like community choirs and so on that created the type of interaction that is so necessary for people. I mean, in the COVID period, it's hard to think about those things now, but that is what we also want to come out of this. There's a spirit of community, a spirit of oneness, because the reality is that if we are going to reshape this nation for the challenges of the 21st century with COVID, we have to be operating as a cohesive unit in this country. And there needs to be an understanding, as the document says, that I have a responsibility to my brother or sister. There has to be also an understanding of civics, that I will go beyond the call of duty to make sure that my country is the best it can possibly be. Not just, great nations are not built by people doing the bare minimum. They're built by people going above and beyond the call of duty for the sake of the nation. And so these are things that will come into play, and perhaps the things we need to also instill in our young people, as you mentioned.
Thank you, Senator Rogers. And I think that is an excellent note for us to close this evening's amazing and engaging and rich discussion on. I want to thank you all. I've made copious notes. I am very appreciative, and I say this on behalf of our staff, of this type of engagement and participation that you have paid to this process. I want to invite you all to continue engaging with us because we are rolling out a very extensive, wider public engagement initiative. We're going to have a series of virtual town hall meetings that are going to be carried on CBC Live. We also encourage you to continue making your submissions to our staff via the dedicated email address, as well as those written submissions by mail to the Cabinet Office located in Bay Street. Mr. Larry, I have not forgotten my promise to you, so I have my notes here, so I'm going to go and address that for you and get back to you in due course. At this stage, I want to hand back over to our facilitators at BARP, and thank you to them as well for making this all possible.
Good evening, Sharita. Dame Billy, the Vice President of BARP, will give the vote of thanks. Dame Billy?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. You can?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Trying to stop the video, but not happening. I don't think that's so very important. You don't have to see me. I want to say a very pleasant good evening. Madam President of BARP, Marilyn Rice Bowen, fellow members of the board, executive manager, our most valued members, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to have been asked to offer a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, sincere thanks to all of you for your attendance here this evening in this virtual setting. We are especially delighted to have had both Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers and Ms. Granum leading the discussion on behalf of the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee. Your insights into the proposed Charter of Barbados were indeed an eye-opener in many respects and shows that we forever are evolving as a society. Thank you so very much, Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers and Ms. Granum. We're also very pleased to have had other members of the committee who were present tonight and shared the richness of our discussion. I would wish to make particular mention of the Honorable Lolita Applewhite. I am not sure if the Most Honorable Patrick Frost, I didn't see his name anywhere, and if he was here, I'm assuming that he would have spoken, but I wish to say thanks to the entire advisory committee for reaching out and embracing BARP in this initiative. To our members who logged on to listen, thank you for your attendance and your interventions. Your involvement was very much appreciated. I want to say thanks to all of you who are with us virtually tonight. National issues like this need the support and buy-in from BARP. Directors and I thank my colleagues for readily agreeing that this consultation was important, should be accommodated. To the executive manager and the entire staff of BARP, special the secretariat I speak of, thank you for your work, your role, and the effort ensuring that this evening's presentation was a success. The behind the curtain and behind the the beauty of what you see, a lot of hard work went in there. I would particularly like to thank the IT team who ensured that tonight's meeting went well. It would not have been possible without your input. Special thanks to each and every one of you. We have this problem still from time to time. You go to these virtual meetings and so on, and there are all kinds of electrical and other problems. I had difficulty hearing and I had to keep my ear to this little computer. And I thank you once again. Thanks to all of you for attending and participating in this presentation. Before I close, I ask you kindly, please, to adhere to the COVID-19 regulations as we try to protect ourselves and our loved ones from this deadly virus. Please continue to stay safe. I bid you all good night and thank you to all of you. God bless.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dembele.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank everyone, and thank you very much. And we wish you a good evening. Thank you, Sharita.
You're most welcome. Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night, everyone, and thank you.
You're welcome.